what are the different methods you guys? I know you talked about, going to trade shows and direct mail, or that type of stuff, outreach. What's working now for some of the? And I guess it could be per industry,
Yeah, I
right?
would say there's nothing that consistently works, right? Every person is different. But the differences with these guys and these business owners is they took the chance and dealt with the crap for 10 years and didn't know the outcome. Yeah, so for the seller of a business, I think the volatility of earnings is probably the biggest red flag for most investors. So
Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to How to Exit Podcast. Today I'm here with Jordan Wagner, and he is the CEO and founder of the Exit Group. We're going to talk about all things buying, selling, and exiting companies. Thank you for being on the show today, Jordan.
thank you for having me.
This is going to be a fun conversation. I always like to talk to the people that have been doing this for a while. Yeah, even though you look young, you've got a lot of deals behind you, and you got a pretty cool program from what we were talking about. So let's start with the origin story. We always want to start with the foundation of who you are and what you've done in the past, so that our audience kind of knows and starts to like you, so they'll listen to the rest of the hour, right? So we got to get them hooked. This is our hook. So tell people where you come from, kind of what you do, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, so we started the Exit Group. I started it with a few other guys about 12, 13 years ago. At that time, literally the first couple of employees were living at my parents' house with me. We had a small office. My dad invested in the company, was helping us build it. He was a huge help for us because he had background in accounting and had sold businesses, bought businesses. But I'd been working at a competitor, basically a company that was doing something similar right out of college for a few years. Got a lot of experience there. And even though young, kind of knew I always wanted to start my own business, wanted to try to do our own thing. So me and one other guy left. Ended up starting the Exit Group then. It took us a while to get going. So the thesis was we would help private equity firms or large corporations acquire, either add-on acquisitions or their initial platform investments in certain categories. But the the first year we didn't close any deals. Second year we didn't close any deals. It was really getting pretty dire at that point. And then we really started to hit our stride. Third year it turned around for us. Fourth year and so on. And now we're kind of up to that, call it 35 to 40 deals a year, probably average size of 40 or 50 million varying. And, it's interesting. I think the biggest advantage we had at that time was being young, low 20s, not having a lot of expenses and having the time to kind of fail for 3 years and build from there. A lot of people look at the company now and say, did you guys think it would get here? And the funny part is we thought it would get there in like 6 months. We were so naive and optimistic that we really didn't realize how hard it was. But I think getting out there young and taking that risk, there wasn't a lot for us to risk at that time. And I look at it now, all these business owners we talk to every day, which is the coolest part of our job. You see all these people who started it, and the older you are, the more risk it is, family, other things. So that was the biggest advantage we had at that point.
I often say there's ignorance and there's brilliance and ignorance, and ignorance in the true definition of the world just mean you're not quite educated on something yet. It doesn't, a lot of people take offense to the word ignorant, but it's the true meaning of it. It's just you're not uneducated in it. I think there's a factor inside of being an entrepreneur that sets you up for winning if you just don't know the full scope of what you're stepping into.
I
Right?
absolutely
Because if you
agree.
truly know the full scope of what you're stepping into, you might not just take that path, right?
We talk to founders all the time, and that's what we do, right? Founders selling their
Mhm,
business. And we always ask the same question you asked me: how'd you start it? And when you hear the story, 90% of the time, if you or I or a family member heard that idea, like, I'm going to leave and start this company that picks up trash or does this, it was like, that's a pretty bad idea, right? And it worked. And that's the biggest thing, is they
mhm.
just take the risk and actually do it, as opposed to overanalyzing it and waiting for the perfect time.
It's if somebody to tell you ahead of time, it's like, "Hey, you're gonna sit down and do this, you guys are gonna work your butt off, but you're not gonna get paid until year 3." You probably would have tried to reevaluate your idea or maybe come up with some other structure or consulting fee along the way, right? Because nobody wants to think I'm gonna work for 2 years without getting seriously paid. As far as the trash picking up idea stuff, I've interviewed all kinds of business owners, and I've interviewed or talked to business owners stuff trying to acquire them. I love their origin stories, and it's very often they unintentionally started a business. It's, "Oh, my buddy, yeah, I did X, Y, and Z for a job. My buddy wanted me to do it on the side, so I did it for him, and he told somebody, and I did it for them. And next thing I know, I'm doing this thing on the side more than I'm doing making more money or as much money, and it just dawned on me, why am I not doing this full time?" That's a very common theme.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked to many businesses that evolve this way. We had a deal we're working on recently, a CPA, standard accounting firm. In the region they were in, there was a lot of property tax law. Says, oh, keep getting these clients that are coming to me to help file their property tax refunds and et cetera. 10 years later, $50 million business focused on property tax.
Yeah, it's interesting, and some of these niches that come out too is like, you would think they would, "Okay, I'm gonna be a tax consultant," but they did better because they became the person to go to for a particular topic, right? If you look at a lot of people look for a barrier to entry or a mode on a business, and sometimes in industries where it's just there isn't much one, anybody can go to college and few of them can pass the CPA exam. You're talking at most tens of thousands, if not $100,000 in education expenses to get there. Not a huge barrier to entry as far as an industry goes, but to carve out an industry and say I'm the best at property taxes, that's where they can really create value in the space. That's cool.
For sure. And there's different ways to win, right, in these businesses.
Mm,
So we have guys who have special licenses or special capabilities that no one else has, and the barrier to entry
mhm.
is massive, and they have great businesses. But there's other businesses that are doing roofing the same way everyone else is, but they're a little bit better, service is better, pricing's better, margins are better, right? And they just run a better business. And so there's just different ways to do it. Obviously, we'd all love a business that has, pricing power and there's hard to get into and there's no competitors, but there's definitely a lot of different ways you can come at it.
Awesome. So tell me about some of the different structures of these deals that you guys work for the PE, and I'm sure strategic buyers also, right?
Yeah. So the thing about our business is a lot of times it's a founder or family or that's exiting. So I would say 40-50% of our deals are owners selling 100%, leaving over a 5-year period. Like, they're at retirement age. That's the
Hmm.
reason for the transaction. The buyer may make them stay for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, depending how important they are to the business. But that might be like the catalyst for the transaction. So that might be 40-50% of our deals. Then a good number of our deals are what we call majority buyouts. So P firm or investment group buys maybe between 51 and 90% of the business. So this allows a founder to take a lot of chips off the table, but they could still own 10, 20, 30% of the business going forward, and maybe stay with it, get more aggressive in growing the business, and try to get a big second bite of the apple down the road.
Yeah, I interviewed Adam Coffey. That's how he built his empire, right? That's how he built CEO of a bot HVAC, and then he moved up, and by the time they sold the big one, it was $2.1 billion of a HVAC company, or 2 point something billion. So yeah,
And
that it's brilliant for some of these business owners to retain some because there's going to be other paydays along, depending on how long they can manage running it.
for sure. And I think with some private equity firms have a bad reputation. Some deserve it, right? Some don't, like any other industry. But I think when you look at a business owner that has those situations where private equity comes in and they retain a piece, one of the things that's real attractive about it is the PE firm is going to be aggressive and really try to grow this business. So it improves your odds of it happening. Where a lot of times, founder, family owned business, like if it's cash flowing nicely, they don't want to rock the boat too much. They have a lifestyle that the business feeds, and they're going to kind of keep it at a more conservative pace. So a lot of times that's what makes these deals go is the founder says, okay, let me pull a lot of my net worth off the table here, pull some chips off, and maybe get a little bit more aggressive and try and hit a home run here with less at stake.
So, out of all the deals you've done, what's some of the craziest things that you've seen come through your pipeline?
In terms of deal, or it's like a situation.
Just crazy companies or crazy deals, like, I always like to hear the oddball ones, like, I interviewed a guy that does, they do the sand molds and stuff for ironworks. I asked him what was the craziest thing they ever made, and they made adult-sized rocking horses that were unicorns for some display in New York. So, those little spring things you rock back and forth on as a kid,
Yeah.
they made ones adult could get onto for New York. So, what's some of and, it's
Yeah, I
just
would say to
is there
me, the most interesting are these
Mhm.
businesses that everybody's going to walk by or use every day, but you don't know they exist. Like those are my favorite types of businesses. So I'll give you a few examples. We did a deal in 2017, kind of over $100 million deal, where the company made emergency battery packs for emergency lighting. So in commercial buildings, specifically after 9/11, if a generator went down, the government wanted a certain number of lights, maybe it's every 10th light or seventh light, to have some sort of like portable battery. So there's a little battery in a commercial building that's whatever, every fifth light. And this guy made those batteries. Nobody thinks of it. It's in every commercial building you could think of. It's a brilliant business. It had to work, right? Like the product gets inspected by the fire department. And it was one of those where you're just like, this guy's kind of hidden. No one knew about him. No one knew the brand name, but it was a huge company. So that's one. We did a deal, a software business, where the software was sold to cities, counties, states, and basically government. And it would be on social workers, iPads, et cetera. And it was basically a solution that they're using now to help try to manage the homeless population. So, person checks into a facility, they have their database. Do they have a drug problem? Violent history, et cetera, and kind of track them throughout the state in different places and try to gain data to solve that problem, which was an interesting one that one person, came up with. The third one I'll give you is a deal we did 2 years ago where the owner has an engineering background and engineered different types of gas detection devices. So he would do ammonia sensors for the backs of kitchens and food service restaurants. He would do carbon dioxide. So, like Amazon and the new warehouses, instead of the trucks backing up to a bay, they'll actually drive through the facility. So, you need more sensors because the cars are inside, things like that. So, those are the ones that I find the most interesting just because, they're right in front of your face. You don't think about them day to day. And then in terms of situation, there's so many. I mean, we've gotten to the end of the deal and background check comes up and say, oh, owner was arrested for murder 30 years ago, spent 10 years in jail, didn't come up. I mean, we get stuff like that every day.
So how would that I mean, if it's nonviolent, or I mean, financial fraud, and they happen to be out and been building a business for 20 years, how does that impact the purchase of a company? Does it
Usually time helps. So like if it's something was 30 years ago, it's better than 30 days ago. There's all sorts of different scenarios, and then different groups have a different risk tolerance depending on who their investor base is. So some of these private equity firms have investors that are public entities that have a position on certain things, or an unwillingness to have something like that in the news. So it depends is what I would say, is so many different scenarios. But it's interesting how many times different scenarios like that come up: a messy divorce, some sort of criminal history, suing a partner, things like that.
Yeah, I avoid some of that stuff. Like, if you see somebody I had a case just 2 weeks ago. Guy calls me, he wants to, if everybody's they see you're an investor, the first thing they want is money, right?
Yes.
So, he needs some money to grow his business, he's willing to give me some equity. It's in my space, my industry that I'm working for one of my clients. He installs commercial cabinets, so we have a group that's buying cabinetries, in Australia and the United States. That said, you get deep down into the story, and he bought he bought the business from somebody, and it was supposed to be way bigger than it is. So he's suing that guy, and you dig down, and he's being sued by other people, and I start digging even further, and this is like his fifth lawsuit, and I'm like, no, right? I don't want to go into business where people have a propensity to sue you, and you have a notion to sue everybody else. You haven't spent a year without a lawsuit, as far as I can see, 4 or 5 years back, 6, 7 years back. That's just not interesting at all,
Yeah,
right? So even if the current ones were all resolved and done, like the fact that that's your track record, that's just the only people that win in these lawsuits are the lawyers. So
that's the truth.
you know, yeah. So let's go into kind of give me, because I'm not sure the audience knows yet. What is the scope exactly what you guys do? You work with private equity and strategic buyers. They come to you and they give you kind of a buyer's box is what I like to call it, but a portfolio or
It's really a
a
wish list or a mandate of what they
wish
want
list,
to
right? Yeah.
buy, right? So they're
Hmm.
saying to us, we want to buy a company, and it could be anything between 100 and 300 million of revenue that makes this type of aerospace part because we think that's going to be needed more the next 20 years, and our investment
Hmm.
thesis is in that direction. And it could be something simple like roofing, HVAC, pest control. It could be something very complex like a heavily engineered product or a healthcare type service or surgical device. And then we dig into the industry, learn everything we can about it, how many players are out there, how many of them have already sold, how many of them are private. We'll go through and basically say, what licenses do you need to perform this? Who's everyone who has that license? Kind of build the universe of people out there. And then we go out, and whether it's trade show, visiting them in their state or facility, calling, email, everything we can do to get in touch with as many as we can. And then break that down to who fits the scope, who has the most attractive business, and which one should our client buy.
I love that you said trade show and going out and to see them, whatever, anything you can get a hold of. Because some of these industries, they're harder and harder to get a hold of, right? It's like this cabinetry industry, they don't hang out on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you're not going to do social media ads or Google ads. They probably rarely check their email. So cold email outreach is a tough thing. These are 65-year-old, woodworkers who happen to own a cabinetry making $1 million a year or more. They may still have a flip phone,
For
right?
sure.
So, you know,
Like
or
we still need a fax machine.
or they still answer the one at their desk. They don't even carry a cell phone. So getting in front of those guys is an interesting thing. You got to go to the trade shows. You got to get in front of wherever the customer has to be going.
For sure.
So what's the toughest one you've had as far as identifying the market and getting in front of potential clients?
I think as they get more competitive and more in our world, it would be trendy, it gets challenging. So you've probably seen all the roll ups in HVAC and roofing. Those spaces have been really tough because owners are getting calls from 20 illegitimate groups that don't really have money and 5 legitimate groups, but it all blends together, and they sort of feel like everyone's a waste of time and it's all BS. And I get that because they have to sift through so much nonsense to get to someone who's really aggressive or wants to make an offer. So those industries have been challenging just in the amount of time you have to invest into them to get people to take you seriously, especially, or at least my perspective is we're working with the upper echelon of buyers in those sectors. So to differentiate yourself is challenging, where some of these hidden industries, you just have a little more time and patience from the owners.
Now is this 100% off market, 100% on market through investment banks, or a mix?
It's a mix. I would say more of our deals are off market because we're contacting people who are not actively looking to sell. Usually they're thinking about it. They might be 3 or 4 years away. And then through our conversations, it moves forward over time. But more of those are, we knocked on their door and said, we want to buy your house, even though it's not for sale type of situation. But we definitely have some where you have to win in a process as well.
Do you find in this level, because you're a level above most of our listeners are trying to buy companies in that PE for, I mean, sorry, the SBA loan range
Mm-hmm.
with maybe a little on top. So say $5 million cap, maybe $7 to $9 million cap with some owner carryback asset purchase, or sorry, purchasing price. You're in that PE realm. Do you see that it's much different as far as from the very first conversation you have to the day you close the deal. These guys, in the SBA realm, they can get it done in 4 to 6 months usually.
Yeah.
Once they have somebody really interested in exiting, what's your time cycle
Yeah,
usually?
it's interesting. People ask that, is it harder to close big deals? Is it take longer? And I would say actually no. It's sometimes harder to get those people, but deals are actually quicker because usually there's a CFO and a legal team and a finance department, and it's just they know that the legal structure, S corp, C corp, they have accountants, et cetera. So sometimes big deals are easier to close in diligence and quicker. The negotiation is not right. You're dealing with a bigger, more sophisticated operation. It's competitive. So I would say, for us, time frame, from the time we talk to an owner, it could be many years until they're interested. But from the day they get the offer and then sign the offer, we're trying to close in 45 to 60 days. Maybe to get to an offer, you're 3 to 4 weeks. So in total, but time kills deals. We're always trying to move once it's serious, move quickly. Now, that probably is exaggerated in terms of how quick because there's always 6 months or a year of kind of light conversation before things start to heat up.
Do you do any coaching on that realm? It's like, look, we're interested in acquiring you, and if you're truly interested in selling, here's the things you need to have in place to make this easy. Do you
Yes,
give them some of that, like, this is what we want in the deal room kind of
ex-
conversation?
exactly. We'll give them sort of a checklist and then we'll try to help them too. Like some owners are like, hey, help me get in my QuickBooks and pull it how you want to pull it. I don't know how to do this. So you kind of have to deal with whatever you can and get used to it of working through different clean data, messy data, et cetera.
Yeah, a lot of these small guys that our audience is listening to, they're like I said, they grew by accident anyway, and they never brought on a full-time bookkeeper. And their idea of their accounting is the bag of receipts they hand their tax person at the end of the year. I grew up that way. My father was a painter, remodeler, and our tax guy. When I was 16, my father asked me if I would wanted to run it for a while. He had a minor heat stroke, and the tax guy pulled me aside one day because we'd seen him somewhere, and he says, "Do you mind bringing me the receipts on quarterly or something? Because your dad just drops off a big shopping bag, like a Safeway bag of receipts at the end of the year, and it takes me weeks to get his stuff done." So that's how I thought accounting was done until I got out and like got away from it and went to college. Right? I didn't even know
Yep.
anything what a spreadsheet was or anything. I mean, I did. I was a computer nerd, but it wasn't like on my radar to do. So a lot of these small businesses are like that. They've done required accounting, like they've done enough accounting to get their taxes done, but other than that, that's it, They might balance their checkbook on a regular basis, but most of the time it's just by these days, it's, same way I do my personal one. I don't carry a check ledger like I used to. I just look at the bank account. Well, that looks odd, and I scroll through a couple pages of, "Oh, okay, now I understand." Right?
For sure. And you see every different way. You see some guys who haven't changed in 30 years and then others who are, more organized than you'd ever believe.
Tell me about, like, what are the different methods you guys I know you talked about, going to trade shows and direct mail, or that type of stuff, outreach. What's working now for some of the what and I guess it could be per industry,
Yeah, I
right?
would say there's nothing that consistently works, right? Every person is different. So you
Mhm,
don't know if they don't have an email or they don't do in person. So we just have to do it all. Like we'll
mm.
call office, cell phone, we will text, email, go to shows. We'll send a package, like a FedEx overnight of, hey, this is what we're thinking. This is the buyer. This is how much money they have. This is why we think you're a fit. So it's very personalized. We're not doing mass blast to 10,000 people. We've kind of selected the companies, whether it's based on facility size, licenses they have, number of employees, the service they provide. So it's a little higher touch since we have lower, call it volume. So, but for us, there's in 12, 13 years, there's never been this works better than this or it's consistent. There's a real randomness to it. I mean, by numbers, email would work best, but that's just because most people respond email. But when you actually look at closed deals, it changes the numbers a little bit because if you get a big one that closes off a letter or a call, you need to do those things as well. So yeah, just you got to find business owners where they're at. They all run it differently, and for us, it's really about the research. Make sure we're going after the right companies so we could spend the time to go after them, accordingly.
Now you're doing off market like, a lot of our guys are. Do you find And your companies are that you're dealing with are a lot more mature, meaning they might have a finance department, they might have a CFO or an accountant on staff, or most of them probably do. That said, do you find that you still have to do a lot of education along the lines of what an exit process looks like? For us, if we go off market, we're both the buyer and almost the advisor because they just don't know, they don't know what to expect. They don't know what an LOI is. They don't know,
Yeah.
they just don't know what to expect, what the next step would look like.
Yeah, it's funny, similar to my last answer, and that is so different, right? Like if we do 40 deals in a year, I would say we're going to have 10 that are just what you described. They don't know what anything looks like. They don't know what the steps are. What's an LOI? When am I in exclusivity? Does that mean we're closing? All those things. And then there's probably 10 that are super prepared, have done a deal in the past. They have a team, and then the 20 in the middle just are all sorts of variations and mixes in between. So we've seen it all, but I would say because they're off market, you do have some education on most deals, whether that's on the legal part of it, financial part of it. A lot of times it's the tax situation. A lot of people don't fully understand what's in their pocket, and that's both ways. You get guys who are expecting to pay income tax, so they're thinking they're going to get a lot less than they are, and others that are not fully accounting for it.
So, what does a day in your office look like? You're doing 30 plus deals a year. What is your team size for that? What kind of team does it take to do that?
A little bit of a boiler room in here. We're in early. I'd say I got in at 6:15 today. Most of the office was here. We have 15 deal people here in the US, and then we have a similar size team in India that is doing a lot of the research, contact info gathering, things like that for us. And they're, only work for us. Our team is in early. We're staying late. We're really trying to get creative on industries where other people aren't. It's a strange game in that we've never had an employee start and close a deal in their first year, right? It takes 2-3 years to build your pipeline. So when you get in the industry, it's like no one's coming here for a 6 month or year job. It's like this better be a place you want to be 10 years because you're really not going to start building that thing until 3 or 4 years in. So, one of the harder parts of the industry is when you're not going to close a deal in your first year, it's like hard to get people to treat everything so seriously and with such urgency when you feel like things are so far out. Over time, as they're here longer, you start to see the bigger picture. But we're really every day working on 50, 60 deals out of our office that are all in different stages, but you have pretty good visibility to if anything's going to close in the next 3 or 4 months, it's going to be under LOI. So it's sort of interesting because in any day, there's guys here 1 or 2 days away from closing something. There's guys here building a list and coming up with a thesis for maybe the next industry we're going to go to hope it close a deal in 2026.
Doesn't that give you some retention also, though, as far as making it hard for people to leave? If I'm working for you, I've spent my 2 years, I've got some deal flow, and it's going to be hard to leave because I've also got rapport with, 50, 60 other leads that at some point they're going to sell. At some point, they know I'm the guy to talk to because I've been rapport, I've been educating them. And if I leave you, all right, they know that they're supposed to call the company and ask for me. When they call the company, I'm no longer there. You're going to assign somebody else, right? They don't, they're not necessarily supposed to, or probably would take those with them. So I think it would give you some, retainability as far as your 15 guys. It's harder for them to leave because they have to leave some stuff on the table when they go.
Yeah, I think we've done a really good job of retention, and part of that is we kind of and I saw in the industry that others were sort of making people earn very little money until they closed the deal, which I thought was challenging just given the time frame. So we kind
Hmm.
of created a shared model when people hit certain milestones, they'll get bonused on just the company deals early. That way we can kind of guide them through those first 2 or 3 years. They can do pretty good. And then when their deals close, it's the same thing for the next round of new people, right? Like some money comes off for the other new people. And we think we've done a really good job of that because there's a lot of upside in our business. And if you're good, after year 2 or 3 or 4, you really have a trajectory to have a long, successful career. But that early year or two is where a lot of companies in our space lose people because they just get a little demotivated. They lose a deal or two. It's been 2 years. They don't see anything closing in 6 months. So I think it's a mix of giving them some rewards in those early years, showing them what it could look like down the road. And then I think for people who aren't may not set out for the industry, either in terms of hours or wanting to grind or personality or skill set, they'll probably leave pretty quickly because it's a tough job. And if you don't feel like you're going to have a big upside on the other side of it, you're unlikely to want to stay.
So this is probably another one of those it depends questions, but in the SBA realm of buying companies, we're typically operating at a 1x for something that's almost an operator job to a 3, maybe 4x for a company that's fairly run as far as a multiple on their EBITDA or sorry, seller's discretionary earnings. There's an arbitrage game in this space to where the PEs usually pay more. What is your valuation model like range that you see on a lot of the transactions you're doing?
Yeah, our deals, so we've done 140 something like that, 140 deals over the time. I would say multiples kind of start at 5x.
Mhm.
5 to 8 would be a big chunk of them. And then as we get up into that 5, 10, 15 of EBITDA, if it's a really attractive company growing, that's when you start to see these outliers that are 10 or 15x. We don't do a ton of those, but every year, like I said, we've just in the last 2, 3 years started hitting that 30, 40 deal a year mark. As we've gotten up to those numbers every year, we have 5 to 7 deals that are well above 10x, but 5 to 8 is sort of the meat of a lot of the deals.
So that tracks with what we're being told at our level is that, below say $4 to $5 million in EBITDA sellers discretionary earnings, you're looking at 3x, 4x max. You get above that, you're in the PE realm, 5 to 7, maybe 8 if you're perfect. Then you get to $10 million in EBITDA or sellers discretionary earnings. Nobody calls it that at 10 million, but you get above that $10 million mark, and now you're playing in the realm of the strategic advisors and public companies interested in buying you, and you can get 10x or 12x, or
Yeah,
something outrageous if you're a Mailchimp or something, and you've been telling people no for a long time, right? You can you see the ones that make the articles and they got like 20x or 30x. It's like, yeah, that's because they've been telling people to take a hike for a while, and people are sick of it and they want it,
for
right?
sure. And I think one of the challenging things in the space is to just, for all of us, right, to know what a good offer is, right? And if someone's house is worth $500,000 and Zillow says it's worth $500,000 and their neighbor sold for $500,000, if I go offer them $3 million, they're pretty sure I'm overpaying, right? But in
Right.
our world, it's tough. It's tough for us. It's tough for the seller. It's tough for the buyer. And we've seen circumstances where someone turned down an offer that I would argue is just too good to be true. And then 3 years later, they get even more. So they were proven right. And then we've had many situations where guy's company might be worth 30, gets offered 50 or 60 for a point in time. Someone needs it. They need to get into that state. They need whatever that thing is. And then a year later, that buyer's gone. Owner comes back to us and like, it's hard to reconcile that you're now at 50% value and it was just a one time thing. And I think the challenge there is it's not always so obvious for anyone, whether you're taking some risk either direction. And I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, one of our challenges at this lower level is they hear the stories of what you guys do and they think their company's worth that, right? We talk to people all the time. My buddy got 7x. I was like, yeah, your buddy was probably a lot bigger than you, wasn't he? Oh
Yep.
yeah, he's doing, 8 or $10 million in revenue. And, I was like, so he's probably doing 4 or 5 in, EBITDA? Seller's discretion earnings, that's what he's taking home. It's like, yeah, get to there and we'll talk, right? You want that 7x? Get to where he was. There's a threshold, a magic line that when you cross it, I always tell him you wake up the big boys, right? And right now the big boys aren't interested in diving down to your level. They're sleepy on you. You want to wake them up? Cross that $4 million, that $5 million EBITDA range, and they'll wake up for you.
Yeah,
It's
we fight the same battle. It's just different, right? Like we get owners
mm,
who say, "Hey, XYZ public companies trading at 20x. I got
mhm.
offered 7." So it's the same thing, just a different comparison.
Yeah. Well, cool. Let's take you public. You got $1 million laying around and a year and a half worth of legal scrutiny to go through.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's interesting. And when I was in the real estate space, when you brought up Zillow, that used to be my pet peeve. People going, but Zillow says my house is worth 700,000, and I was like, you should take that offer right now. Did they write you a check?
Yeah.
Did they send you a contract? Oh no. I was like, that's because Zillow is not right on your house, and like they buy houses all the time. Call them up because back then they were, and I don't think they're still doing it. But it's like call them up and have them put an offer in your house. See what it is, because I promise that it ain't the Zillow price. And if they beat my offer, take it. Like I'm not. I did my math. My math is my math. That's where I'm at. And if Zillow beats it, man, you should take that. It's better for your family. I don't mind. There's plenty of houses here,
Yep.
right? A lot of people, they don't get that too. They don't realize that they come to you and you offer them something $50 million on their business, and they tell them no. They think that seller's going to hang out for 5 years and wait for them to come back. Now, if that seller, sorry, the buyer, if that buyer is trying to break into that market, he's going to find a way into the market. He's just going to buy one of your other competitors, or he's going to spend even more money penetrating the market on his own research and his own products, right?
Yeah, we've
You know,
definitely had, yeah, you see it both ways. And like I said, it's tough, right? Some guys, some industries go like this for a while. And so the saying no pays off and just keeps going up. And other times that gravy train ends. And so it's really, I always tell owners to really think about what they want, time of life, more importantly,
mhm.
their family situation. But if it's the right time or close to the right time and a really strong offer is when they should consider it, because it's not always a strong offer around.
I think there's a little bit in our space, in the acquisition entrepreneur space, there's a little bit of ego you have to watch out for. For me to tell somebody that I'm going to come in and buy your company that you've run for the last 30 years, regardless of my education, whether it's Ivy and I'm a search funder or what, but to tell you I'm going to step in and improve your business after you've been in the industry for 30 years, that's a very egotistical thing to say.
For
And I
sure.
think a lot of these buyers have a wake up call in that first 6 months. That's when I host networking things, and I have people from all different groups and search funders and acquisition entrepreneurs and all stuff. They show up to these networking groups where we're hanging out, we're helping each other get deals done. And the thing I always tell them when they're really green like that is buy something with a bigger profit margin. He says, "Why?" Because you're going to get an ego check in the first year, and you need that buffer space to be able to handle your mistakes while you learn the industry, right?
Absolutely.
You're not nearly as hot as you think you are, and we all, I'm old enough to know it, right? I've stepped myself into some stuff in my history at 52 years old now, but you're pretty young and you haven't stepped in enough piles to realize that you buy something with a 5 or 10% profit margin, you're going to be hurting it at certain times when you make mistakes that you're going to naturally make learning something new.
For sure. And it's interesting. You see the playbook work. PE guys are sharp. They know how to run businesses, but you get certain founders, they run a business and they're 30% EBITDA and everyone else in the space is 15. And the analysts and the consultants say, there's no way that's sustainable. We've seen a million companies in this space. And then 10 years later, the guy's still doing it. And you're like, some people just have a way to figure out something slightly different, same
Hmm.
industry everyone else is in, and just do it a little better.
Yep, they just add something different on it. Or I see industries where the pricing's just been the same in an industry for a long time, and nobody's had the nerve because they think they're in a commodity industry to step up and go, we're the premium supplier, we're the premium provider. We want a 25%, on top of it. And you'd be
Yeah.
surprised at how often the market just shrugs their shoulders and goes because they don't want to change,
Yeah. I mean,
right?
pricing's such a great lever for a business if you can use it.
If you think about some things like, let's use bookkeeping, for example. Low barrier to entry. Anybody can start a bookkeeping company, but once you're in there and you're using the guy, it's a pain in the butt to change it. If my
Absolutely.
bookkeeper called me today and said, no, I hope he's not listening. It's like my bookkeeper called me today and said, "Hey, we're going to want a 20% increase for next year." I'd probably just shrug my shoulders. That's fine, because I ain't moving it. That's a nightmare. The next guy's going to
Yep.
say we did this. Well, everything we've done wrong is like it's going to come out. Everything that the new guy thinks we did wrong is going to have to be changed. It's just everybody. It's one of those things everybody does slightly different.
For sure. And the pain, like you said, the pain of moving is a huge advantage
Yeah.
in that space.
That's one of those industries where there's not much of a barrier to entry, but there's a barrier to leaving, and it's a recurring model. So once you get somebody there, it's tough for them to leave because especially if you do a good job and not hurting them, they're not going anywhere. So you got longevity in client. You got the customer life cycle is incredible in those spaces.
For
So
sure. And it's like we talked about earlier. I think we all want a business with a high barrier to entry. It's ideal, but there's a lot of different ways to win, and you could just be better. And whether it's a gym or
mm,
someone who's personal training business or a bookkeeper, there's no barriers to entry there, but there's still people who are very successful by just doing it better. And I think at the end of the day, for people who are looking to start businesses or get into business, there's also just what you can do, right? Like some of us have skill sets that fit an interest, and it's going to take a while to start a business. So you got to sort of love the industry and be passionate about it. And that happens to be an industry that doesn't have a barrier to entry, it doesn't mean it's a bad business.
So going on the interest level, you have 15 guys, and they got to work a long time in their space before they generate significant income. Do your guys kind of do that? Do they kind of specialize in certain interest areas, like they seek out PE firms looking for something they have an interest in?
So somewhat, we have some guys who have had engineering backgrounds who definitely do more product focus, like
Mhm.
aerospace, surgical, things like that. But generally, what I would say in this industry is sort of like you and I spoke about earlier. You're curious about business and how businesses work and how they operate and why they're successful. You need that. If you don't have that, it's just this industry will be terrible. You won't like it because that's just the whole fun of it, right? And so I think the people who have that find businesses, if it's a trash company, if it's an AI company, whatever it is, just as interesting, right? Like it's just the dynamics of what makes it successful, how the person got to this point. That's more important than like I'm a healthcare guy.
I would say I'm so curious about how businesses are running that it's a pain point for the wife. If we are in any facility, any business, whether it's a coffee shop or a small restaurant, and somebody says, "Oh yeah, I'm the owner," you can see my wife cringe because she knows we're going to be there for 30, 40 minutes because I'm going to, be intrigued. And people love to tell you what they built. I rarely get people unless they're booked back to back or super swamped in a day. If they've got time on their hands and you go, "Really, this is yours? Why did you start this business?" How did you start this business? And you just get them talking. I walked out of places and have the entire business, plan and roadmap for a company. And my wife's like, "How in the hell did you do that?" I'm interested. I'm curious.
Yep,
And I didn't give them, I didn't sit there and tell them about me. I just asked them about them. And that's rare in this day and time. Most people want to pitch you something or sell you something. And all I do is just in those scenarios is go, cool. What did did anybody help you build it? Or, I'll get numbers from people sometimes, and my wife's like, "How did that person give you all their financials?" I said, "They kinda didn't, right?" I just said, you know, "Hey, I was up there. I spent $15. Is that your average ticket, range?" "Oh, no, we do about 17, 18." I was like, "What? I see about 80 people in here, and I've been here for 20 minutes. What do you serve, about 7, 800 people today?" And they're like, "No, we do this." And the next thing you know, I'm
yeah,
pretty fast with math. I can go, "Man, you're turning X, Y, and Z out of this company." And they'll go, I've never shared my financials with everybody, but yeah, you're pretty close." Yeah, but I'm wired different, right? And I bet
yep,
your guys are the same way. I'm intrigued by how things work and why they work, and how do then you take if you're really good at this stuff, you try take some of that and go, "How do I do this in my world?" Right? How do I add a subscription base to something I'm doing that's not typically a subscription based business? How do I add a premium service for something I never thought could be a premium service?
for sure. And I think that you said that curiosity, people either have it or they don't.
In your space, is there anything that you truly love? Like, man, I just really love it when, like, a PE firm calls in and asks for SaaS companies, or they call and ask for this. Is there anything that you're just passionate about and doing?
I think for me, the passion's really the owners. I love meeting people, and I think I like unconventional backgrounds. So went to Harvard, I got my MBA. Typical story, like, is less interesting to me, but moved to America when I was 40 from Iran and worked as a janitor and then became a chemist, then started a skincare company. Like those stories are the thing that I'm most interested in. And it's half the business owners we deal with have a story like that, right? Like, was in my family business, got in a fight with my family, so I left and started this. Just always these stories that you just feels like, what are the odds that kind of navigated this? And I would say, there's so much talk now about wealth gap and everything. It's so interesting to me how many of these founders had no leg up and no advantages and no, just bottom of the barrel, sort of working their way up to start something. And it's always looks like it was pretty quick and miraculous. But when the story, started 30 years ago or 40 years ago, you realize, there was 15, 20 years that no one was believing.
I would say between just in the last 5 or 6 years, not even including my 52 years of life, it's in the 5 or 6 years that I've been changing careers and doing this. The couple years I was trying to do it before I really, like, got educated on the space and everything. I've spoke to at least at least 1,000. 250 of you guys I've interviewed, right? 260 somewhere in that realm. I've talked to business owners on roll-ups, or one of our roll-ups we talked to 200, 220, 230 marketing agencies in a very short period of time. And I can tell you, out of all of them, I can probably count on my fingers and not need to take off a shoe how many times somebody comes from Ivy. And so I think that's what you were bringing up as far as the income gap and stuff like that, and how there's this us versus them that's in the media. I think that's a media play 100%, because if you really look at it, the majority, like I said, probably out of over 1,000, maybe 10 or 15 at most, were Ivy, right? They came from that. Maybe that's just not my circle, and that's why I don't know them. But most of these guys came from nothing, right? I know people who were homeless at some point. I know at least 5, 6 people that are homeless at some point in their life, and now they're doing millions, right? It's that sometimes that transformation of I'm done being homeless, I'm done being at the bottom of the barrel. It gives them the fight they needed to make it. So yeah, I don't believe in that narrative at all.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Any business that we've sold that's worth a significant amount of money, if it was started 30, 40 years ago or 20 years ago, I think anybody listening would say, oh, I'd take 10 years of crap to get $200 million payoff or whatever the math is there. But the differences with these guys and these business owners is they took the chance and dealt with the crap for 10 years and didn't know the outcome. Of course,
Right.
everyone would do it if they knew the outcome, right? If they knew I just got to deal with this for 2 years or 3 years or 6 years, but you got to deal with it for that amount of time. And the result might be closing up your doors too. It might be for nothing.
So, what makes a good acquisition for if somebody's listening and they got a business to sell, they're doing say $5, $10 million in EBITDA, what makes them ready for a strategic buyer? Somebody's going to pay them a premium.
So the premiums really go to businesses that have some form of a recurring, predictable, stable model. So that doesn't need to be a subscription, right? That could be a consulting company or something that is hourly. But okay, if I'm a property tax consultant, I know you need to do that every year. So my customers are coming back. So there's something controllable, sustainable, sticky about it. Two would be solid margins, right? So you have a base of a healthy margin business, call it 15 or 20% net profit, something like that. Growth is probably the biggest lever. So if you're growing organically 20 or 30% or over 10% even, as that looks, more stable, the higher you could pay. Because, if a company is 10 million of EBITDA today and it's growing 50%, buyer can say, okay, I could pay them 100 million, which is 10 times, because in 1 year, that'll look like 5 times, right? Or whatever that math works out to. So that's sort of really, really effective in terms of, getting a higher valuation in terms of growth. And then generally, they're looking for a market that is growing as well. So the company could be growing individually, but if the market itself is growing, so if the HVAC industry is growing, or like I brought up the batteries, that market was growing because the laws were getting stricter. So you needed more batteries in a commercial building. That kind of gives you another lever that grows the multiple. And then the point you made earlier, right, is like you've said no a lot. There's a lot of people interested, just like anything else. If there's 3 bidders on a house, it's helpful. When there's more and more interest in a space and you're more of a rare asset in that space, it's going to get more competitive. But the controllable things for a business owner really are, how predictable and stable is that revenue? Like the risk is what they're looking at. And they're looking at it from a perspective of, if we buy this company today, what are the odds that it drops 50% next year? And the more that business looks like a company that's pretty safely going to climb, the more they're going to pay for it.
And what you said there, one of the things that really stuck out to me is when an owner's ready to retire or sell, a lot of times they don't realize how bad they're shooting themselves in the foot when they take their foot off the gas, right? Because a lot of times when people think they're ready to sell, they slow down a bit, they start cleaning up their books and stuff, and they're not growing as strong. And that's such a powerful lever to add to your attractiveness to sell. I don't think, sorry, I don't think business owners realize how bad that's hurting them. And you see
Yeah.
it all the time. Like, oh yeah, we were doing this last year, but since I decided to sell, we're kind of slowing things down and cleaning things up. And this year, we're only going to hit 80% of what we did last year. And now now you appear as a declining business as opposed to something that's growing year over year. And it's very common. It's very common if somebody makes the determination to sell before they talk to somebody like you or me or somebody that says, whoa, 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 whatever you do, keep your foot on the gas.
For
Right.
sure. You definitely want to be growing. I mean, it's a huge discrepancy in what multiple you're going to get. And realistically, you want to run the business like you're going to hold it forever. Like, what would you do if you were going to keep owning it? Because that's what the next guy wants to see. They don't want to see that you cut back here and you're not hiring or not investing in R&D or growth, because then they start wondering, what else were you cutting?
So, what is the best way for people to kind of work with you, present to you? We do have a lot of PE guys that come on here that listen to the show. A lot of them are guests. I talk to them off to the side on one-on-one calls with them. If somebody wants to work with you and have you guys source deals for them, what's the best way for them to initiate that
Yeah, go
process?
go to our website. Our contact info, mine as well, is on there. Exit Group, EXIT, exitgroup.com.
Mm.
And then my Instagram's just my name, Jordan Wagner.
Cool. And then let's do some takeaways real quick so that we have some powerful stuff to share. If somebody can only remember two or three things from the show today, what would you have them remember?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find most interesting, and I think since a lot of your listeners may be trying to get into business or want to start a business, is just remembering that, you don't need to start the next Uber or Facebook, right? It doesn't need to be, some people are waiting for this grand idea. And I think hearing about the gyms and the trash companies and the accounting firms and bookkeeping that are just normal businesses, that they're doing something a little better customer service, quicker, support for customers, better margins, and they can be really, really good businesses. So that'd be one of the big takeaways that I think for the audience is helpful, is just, it doesn't need to be the next big idea. There's a lot of boring businesses that you can make a lot of money doing.
Yeah, I don't know how many stories I've heard of somebody going, "Yeah, we clean grease traps." I was like, "What do you mean?" So we have a septic like truck that cleans out the grease trap behind companies, and then we take the grease filters off the air filters, and we have a hot water wash system on the back of our trucks that we wash those off and give them back to them. I was like, "Cool, how much you doing?" "Oh, 9.5 million in revenue, no profit." You're like, you know, in what, a city like a huge city? No, no, we're only focused on it's nothing the size of Dallas or anything. It's usually like a population of,
Yeah.
a smaller city. So you'd be surprised at how many of these little mom and pop shops make serious, serious money, and more than you would need to live this lifestyle you want, and more than you would need to have a substantial exit when it's time to sell. Yeah, I'm on board with that one too. Let's finish this off one good way here. What would be something to be a giant red flag that would stop you from moving forward with either a PE firm or the seller of a business?
Yeah. So for the seller of a business, I think the volatility of earnings is probably the biggest red flag for most investors. So we talk a lot of times, it's new construction exposure or things that are tied to a certain point in time in the economy. But, you'd almost rather grow from 2 million to 3 million to 4 million to 5 than 2 to 10, back to 2, 12, back down. I think volatility scares PE firms, scares investors. And even if that means there's big upside, a lot of times, like, they're really more focused on the downside than the upside.
And then for the if a PE firm comes here, is there anything going to stop you from doing that? Do they have to have a track record of doing deals? Can they be fresh off of their
Yeah, I
first
think the
raise or
history. So anytime they talk a big game and to tell us what they want to do, but they've never actually done it, that's the biggest red flag for us. Like, there's so few groups that can do 20, 30, 40 deals a year. So sometimes we get a group that comes to us and pitches us, we want to do this many, but they've done a deal a year, for the last 3 years. So for us, like, you really have to look at the history and just assume they're going to do what they've always done.
awesome. Well, thank you. We'll wrap this up. We'll call that an episode, and I'll make sure to put your contact information and ways to reach you in the show notes for people.
I appreciate it. It was great speaking with you.
We'll call that a show. Hang out for a few minutes. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.